Chinese President Xi Jinping delivers a message of unity and cooperation as the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting comes to a close in San Francisco. Hello, I'm Einar. Welcome to this special edition of The Heat. It's been a very busy week as leaders from the world's 21 APEC member economies gathered here in San Francisco. On Friday, Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered remarks at the Leaders Retreat calling for a new golden age for the Asia-Pacific region. My colleague Dan Williams is here with me now for more on President Xi's speech and this week's key takeaways. Dan, of course, this APEC leaders meeting culminated, as I just said, with the traditional retreat. We heard from all delegations there. What did we hear from President Xi?
Yeah, Xi Jinping at this Economic Leaders Retreat, which of course has been, as you say, the big focus, really talked about how there's a need to reflect on where we, the member economies, what they can do to create a new golden age for the region, saying that APEC really has to play a bigger role in promoting development as well, saying that we must join hands in order to create unity for the Asia-Pacific, and also talking about a number of recommendations in order to make that happen, including actively encouraging technical exchange, adhering to the principle of openness and open trade development, as well as promoting green development as well. Talking about how for 2024, very much hopeful by the time the next APEC comes around that the common development and prosperity will be the key outcomes for APEC 24.
Of course, Dan, these leaders talked about a whole range of issues over the past few days: economic issues, trade issues, security issues, climate issues, women's empowerment, and we didn't expect there to be agreement on everything, but there was an agreement on some issues, and one of that was the agreement between the United States and China on military-to-military communications, reopening those channels. Yeah,
this was one of the big things that obviously came out of the US President Joe Biden and Xi Jinping's China President summit that was held on Wednesday, really making a very progressive step forward in terms of stabilizing the relationships there. And one of the real tangibles from that, as you say, was the restoring of military-to-military communications. Going back towards the Military Maritime Consultative Agreement, which until 2020 had been used to improve safety in the air and on the sea, and both of the leaders really talking about how important it is to have clear and effective communication in this sphere.
Okay, Dan, stay with us. Let's bring in the rest of our panel. Joining us from Boston is Jorge Heine. He is the former Chilean ambassador to China and a research professor with the Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University. From Austin, Texas, David Firestein is the president and CEO of the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations. And from Beijing, we're joined by Einar Tangen. He is a senior fellow at the Taihe Institute and founder and chair of Asia Narratives. Welcome to all of you. Einar, let's get back to that brief speech that President Xi made at the Leaders Retreat on Friday in San Francisco. He reiterated some of the major themes that this conference has been talking about over the past week. You know, there were things like they talked about inclusiveness, a bigger role for APEC in global growth, green transformation, and of course gender equity as well. What did you make of the week's events? What were your main takeaways?
For the week, I mean, Xi definitely emerged as the adult in the room. He was not distracted by other statements by Biden or others, and he kept to his vision. It's about inclusive and shared development, very different from past models pushed by the United States. There were a number of positive toned things, but not very few agreements. At this point, I really do think that Xi has decided that it's going to be very, very difficult to change minds in Washington, inside the Beltway, among the political elite. However, getting 3 standing ovations from corporate America as he expounded on making China more open, making sure its markets are available to those who want to trade in it, and also the people-to-people exchange. He really wants to push that. I think that's He's really going to try to talk to the people. There are a lot of incidences there where he's showing pictures of him as a young man, talking about his time visiting in Iowa, really kind of bringing it down to, just human interaction. And I think this is very important. So he's going to the people and business. We'll see if Washington agrees.
David, of course, this was a multilateral meeting, but there was a big focus this week on that bilateral meeting that took place between President Xi and President Biden. They met outside of San Francisco for more than 4 hours, and they discussed a whole range of issues. There have been tensions in this relationship over the past few years, although in the past few months there have been efforts to ease those tensions. We've seen a string of cabinet members from the United States go to China for talks with Chinese officials. We've seen the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Washington. He was here just a few weeks ago. Do you think this face-to-face encounter that took place just outside San Francisco would ease tensions and would also clear the air in many of the contentious issues between the two countries?
Well, I do think it helps ease tensions, which have been, in fact, very high, as you've noted. And anytime you have the leaders of two consequential countries coming together and meeting face to face and having direct and straightforward dialogue with each other, I think that's a good thing. And it ensures that the two leaders are hearing from each other directly in an unmediated way. And I think there's a great deal of clarity about that kind of communication. And as President Biden noted, there's no substitute for face-to-face, in-person communication. So I think that was very positive. I think a lot of the tensions in the U.S.-China relationship are very deeply rooted, and I think there are certain issues on the U.S.-China agenda, certainly as the United States construes that agenda, that are essentially intractable. Taiwan is one of those, and I know that came up in a prominent way in the bilateral meeting between the two presidents. But at the same time, I think the thing that was encouraging about the bilateral meeting is that there was an effort to look at the other issues in the relationship where collaboration makes sense for both sides and for the region and for the world. And so I think there was a positive vibe, if you will, to the meeting in the sense that there's a willingness to look at issues like artificial intelligence, military-to-military communication, the issue of fentanyl and the precursors, and a number of other issues, climate and so on. And I think that's good. That's encouraging, and it's the direction that the relationship should go. So overall, I think the bilateral summit between the two presidents was positive, and I think the goal of the two leaders is to get the relationship stabilized and to get it moving in a more functional direction that serves the interests of both countries. And I think it was a good step in that direction.
And as David points out, there were agreements on several issues, that agreement on military-to-military communications being one of them. There was also agreement on opening a dialogue on things like artificial intelligence. But what's the view from Beijing? What did you make of what was accomplished? And is this some kind of a reset between these two countries?
No, I don't think it's really a reset. It's a continuation, but it's more open. They're actually meeting, they're talking. This is very important. But when you get right down to it, it's two very, very different attitudes towards the world. Xi Jinping was talking about win-win opportunities, avoiding conflicts, whereas Biden is still sticking to the zero-sum, manage conflicts to come. Which anticipates that there's going to be more of them, and also very guarded. So very different approaches to this, and I agree with my colleague. This signals that there's still a lot of work to be done. Trust is a huge issue. Both sides need to develop it, but that takes time, and it takes action. So at least we have a couple of actions in terms of climate, in terms of opening up talks and things like that, making sure they can get to each other, and the military, of course. And then there was, of course, the fentanyl thing, although I don't quite understand why when America wants to buy drugs, it's always somebody else's problem.
Ambassador Jorge Heine, how does this positive shift in relations impact the rest of the world? What's the view from South America?
Well, the view from South America is the following. In South America, trade with Asia and the Asia Pacific is extremely important. There are two South American countries, of course, that are members of APEC. One of them is Chile, my own country. The other is Peru. And those two countries have benefited tremendously from APEC and from the economic relationship with the Asia Pacific. Now, the concern has been that APEC has been having some issues. APEC is not what it used to be. It has lost some of its vigor. It has lost some of its impetus. And my view of the San Francisco APEC 2023 meeting is that it might give a new impetus. The fact that we had this meeting between the two world leaders. An interesting detail, the president of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, known as AMLO, who rarely travels, he attended the summit. He met with President Xi, he met with President Biden. I think that's a signal of how significant Mexico considers APEC to be. The whole issue of giving a new impetus to trans-Pacific trade, it seems to me, is extremely important. We have these various entities, the RCEP, the CPTPP, DEPA, but in the end, the advantage of APEC is that it's been around a long time. Its resolutions are non-binding, but it brings together so many significant economies. And my sense is that there is a glimmer of hope that between now and the next meeting that will take place in Peru next year, APEC might recover its initial impetus with which it started some 30 years ago.
Right, Ambassador, when you say APEC might recover, what would you be looking for?
Well, I would be looking for to look for ways in which trans-Pacific trade can be liberalized and can be made easier. It seems to me that we have seen too much protectionism in this past few years and an unwillingness to move forward on liberalizing trade. That was the original driving force behind APEC. That's what made it into what it is. And it seems to me that if we can recover that impetus, we would all be in a better place.
Dan, we heard the Chinese president say more than once, talk about the importance of people-to-people interactions. Talk to us about that and the importance for China of personal engagement.
Well, I think perhaps the best example of this, of course, was Xi Jinping's trip to Iowa in 1985 that we talked about a little earlier, and just how that shaped his view of the US and gave him more of a worldview as well. And it underlined, I think he's mentioned it many times, the importance for these people-to-people exchanges. Now, we obviously saw through the pandemic and with some of these recent tensions between China and the US, perhaps some of these exchange programs being paused and some being halted, and there's very much now this emphasis to get some of these back on track in order to try and move this forward from old friends to more new friends.
Einar, as you pointed out a moment ago, President Xi received 3 standing ovations at that dinner with American business leaders here in San Francisco. Some of the more prominent business leaders at that meeting was Tesla's Elon Musk, Tim Cook of Apple was also there, Lawrence Fink of BlackRock was also there. The underlying message from President Xi is that China is now open for business. Do you think he was successful in conveying it?
Well, I don't think they'd be standing up and clapping if he wasn't. Yeah, I think it's very clear. But, what you see here is the economic side perhaps at odds with the political side. I mean, the rhetoric coming out of Washington is not what corporate America wants to hear. They don't want to be cut off from the largest middle-class market in the world. And they, really, they have nowhere else to make it up. So their growth plans would be severely curtailed. The fact that, it's easier to get money in and out of China, and that, they're going Xi has said that he's going to get rid of everything he possibly can, including any kind of restrictions on manufacturing and ownership and things like this. And generally when China says something, they do it. It's not like a lot of other places.
David, what are your thoughts on the Chinese president's outreach to American business, to corporate America?
Well, I think President Xi certainly made a lot of the right points, and I think that's why he got the reception that he did among the U.S. business community. I think the concern within the U.S. business community is, will the actions on the part of China match the rhetoric? Because the rhetoric, I think, at this point is broadly in the right place. The idea of maintaining an open economy, inviting and welcoming the return of U.S. investment, U.S. commercial activity in China after this 3 years of COVID, really kind of impeding the normal flow of commerce between the two countries, and focusing on innovation as he did, and as President Xi did in his speech to the APEC leaders. All of those are the right message, and certainly a message that would be warmly received by the U.S. business community. I think ultimately the U.S. business community wants this relationship, this commercial and economic and trade relationship between the United States and China, to be robust and to function at record-setting levels, as we did in 2022 with two-way trade between the two countries reaching a record level. But the question ultimately is, will China take specific steps to bring itself into alignment with the rhetoric? And I think if it does that, then you're going to see the continued support of the U.S. business community for a very strong and robust U.S.-China relationship, and certainly for a very robust U.S.-China economic and commercial relationship. But I think time will tell whether China takes the actions necessary to assuage some of the longstanding concerns that the U.S. business community has had. But in terms of messaging, I think President Xi certainly laid out a message that was warmly welcomed by the U.S. business community.
Ambassador Heine, President Xi held several bilateral meetings while he was here in San Francisco. You mentioned some of them. He met the President of Mexico. He also met the Peruvian leader as well. China is, of course, involved in a major development in Peru right now, the construction of that port. It's part of its Belt and Road Initiative. My colleague Mike Walter sat down with the Peruvian trade minister here in San Francisco to discuss China's investments. Let's listen to what the minister had to say.
They are not only buying now some manufactured products, but also they are investing not only in the mining sector, that was the main focus for them, but they're investing in infrastructure. They have invested in a very important port that is called Shanghai. And the slogan is from Shanghai to Shanghai, because it goes directly and with a reduction of the freight that is very important, because it is becoming a very important hub, not for Peru, but for South America.
So, Ambassador Heine, this port is being hailed as the new gateway to Asia. It's a $3 billion project. What does it do, not just for Peru, but for the hinterland, for the region as a whole?
Well, I think it's a very important step. As I said earlier, by now, for South America, China is the #1 trading partner. It is true also for Brazil, Uruguay, Chile, and Peru individually. So there are a lot of goods that need to be taken across the Pacific. The ports are bursting at the seams, and the port of Callao, the main port of Peru traditionally, is already full. And therefore, this port, it's a $3.6 billion project actually, that will be inaugurated next year, and that is very much on schedule. Sends a very important signal, but it also increases the facilities for logistics and transport that South America so badly need. So I would stress that the port of Shanghai is extremely important, not just for Peru, but for all of South America. We need more of those projects. It seems to me Shanghai embodies the best of what the Belt and Road Initiative has to offer to Latin America, that needs more infrastructure, more ports, more railways, more tunnels, more bridges, if we really want to be competitive around the world.
And Ambassador, of course, Peru is scheduled to host the next APEC. That'll take place in 2024 in that country. How does this position Peru as a destination for tourism, for investment?
Well, Peru is a country with a very vigorous economy. It is one of the economies that is growing the fastest in South America in the current century. It has much going for it. It's both a mining country, a cultural exporter, a country that has tremendous assets. And I think it is very well positioned for continuing to grow in its in relations with Asia. It's very interesting to know that Peru got into APEC in 1997. It was the third of Latin American countries to join APEC. Mexico did first in 93, Chile did in 94, and then Peru joined, and just in time, because shortly thereafter, APEC closed its doors to any further members. So it got in just in the nick of time, and it's done very well as a result of it. Peru shares with Chile one thing that I've called to view globalization as Asianization, meaning that both Chile and Peru have understood that in today's globalized world, the action is in Asia. And that therefore, if we want to grow, if we want to get more investment, want to have more trade, we must focus our energies on Asia. And that is what is being done.
Dan, another big issue on the agenda at the meetings this week was AI, artificial intelligence, and the need for more transparency, especially in military applications of this new technology. Did we see any progress?
Well, certainly this is the hot topic, and it's something that was stressed today at the leaders' retreat by both Xi Jinping and Joe Biden in their speeches. Xi Jinping in his speech saying that he actively encourages the technical exchange and an open and equitable technological community and supporting the development of AI cloud computing, big push to accelerate digital transformation. But of course, AI remains, as I say, a huge concern. How do you develop the pros, but also navigate through the potential cons? And it comes at a time when some of the architects of AI have really been speaking out about their concerns over the tech going forward. And the fact that these two countries are now talking about it and trying to engage on this issue is obviously the key element. It's clearly a discussion that cannot be stopped at any border.
David, one other issue, that's climate change. Both these countries, China and the United States, reaffirmed their commitment to working jointly on the climate crisis. Beijing and Washington set new global renewables targets and will work together on methane and plastic pollution. This announcement, of course, comes just before weeks before world leaders gather in Dubai for the UN climate change conference known as COP28. How critical is it for China and the United States to be united on the climate crisis? Let's not forget that these were the two countries that led the way to the adoption of the Paris Accords.
Well, I think it is critical that the United States and China work in common cause and in a collaborative way, along with many other key stakeholders, to deal with the pressing issue of climate change. There's no question that if the United States and China are not working in a way that is coordinated and basically committed to the same goal, then it's going to be very difficult for the world to achieve the objectives that have been set out, given that the United States and China are the two largest carbon emitters in the world and will be for some time to come. So I think that was one of a number of areas where there seemed to be some progress tonally and I think substantively on an issue that's important and on an issue that is transnational, meaning that by definition, no one country can solve this particular problem. It takes the efforts of the United States, China, and many others, but certainly not least the United States and China as key players. And I was very encouraged to see some of the positive movement on that particular issue.
Ambassador Heine, in a written statement to the APEC CEO meeting, President Xi said China will continue to pursue development with its doors open. He said, and I'm quoting him here, "We will unswervingly advance high standard opening up and further expand market access." How encouraging a sign is this for foreign investment?
I think it is. I mean, one of the signature features of the Chinese approach to development in the past few decades has been very much to stress openness, to stress the benefits of globalization, to stress the benefits of FDI. And in that sense, it seems to me, to continue along that path and for it to be stressed by President Xi is extremely important. We're all better off if there is more international trade, if there is more foreign investment. And that is what President Xi has been stressing.
David, the Chinese president and the US president made it very clear that they're not looking for conflict. President Xi said planet Earth is big enough for both countries to succeed. What do you think needs to happen right now for this relationship to improve?
Well, first of all, I think more high-level direct contact of the type that we just saw this week, more engagement between the two presidents, between the two secretaries of state, foreign ministers, and other cabinet-level officials. I think we need to see a different kind of rhetoric, I think, on both sides, one that is more focused on pragmatic cooperation and working together on the areas where it makes sense for both countries to do so. And when we have disagreements, which we certainly do and will continue to have, we can talk about those, I think, in a way that is less inflammatory or incendiary, so that we can continue to have a functional working relationship on the issues where we can and must work together in order to generate progress, whether that's climate, whether that's illicit narcotics, and so on. So I think the tonal part of it is important, but following up on the substance and the communications is also going to be very important as well.
Einar, very quickly, I've got less than 30 seconds left. You know, these meetings, these high-level meetings are about as much about optics as they are about substance. What did you make of the optics of the meeting between President Xi and President Biden, especially that walk that they took on the estate just south of San Francisco?
Carefully orchestrated. It was meant to show, some unity, also some, friendliness on the part of two people who've been together quite a bit of time. Unfortunately, it just seems like politics, especially on Biden's part, as he seeks re-election, is kind of in the way.
Right. Okay, and that is where we have to leave it with this special edition of The Heat. Thanks to everyone for joining us. I'm Arnold Naidu in San Francisco.
From sustainability and digitalization to trade, health, and energy security, 21 major Asian-Pacific economies gather to address the most pressing global challenges and to create a future of sustainable economic growth. Join CGTN for our coverage of APEC 2023.